Hello friends, so this is my first quilt ever. The first one that I made. It's pretty huge. I can't fit it on the floor of our living room. And I finished the top and I am actually at the moment hand quilting it. So I already have the quilt sandwich here and I'm hand quilting it with big stitches. For that I am using these cotton threads here. This is the DMC cotton pearl thread and I am hand quilting it. And my goal at this moment is to finish the diagonals. I have one big diagonal left, so a whole one down here and then at that end some. And I want to finish hand quilting the diagonals so that I can put on the binding. So this is the binding that I made. I made it out of just scrap fabric that I had left over from this quilt. I was a bit scared that I wouldn't have enough, but I have more than enough left over, and this one is about 10 meters long. The quilt is, I'm not quite sure, 2 meters by 240, something around that. So I want to finish the hand stitching of the diagonals, then bind this with a sewing machine and then go back and I have to also quilt these little diamond shapes because the distance between the lines, which is what I originally wanted to do, is too far apart for this quilt batting. So we'll have to go back and continue quilting these diamonds. But first of all, I just wanted to have the binding on so that the edges are nice, because this quilt is huge and I am sitting on the sofa with it while quilting, and that is just not the best thing with these raw edges. So I will go back to hand stitching the diagonals and hopefully finish that quite soon so that I can finally bind this quilt. So I finished the last of the whole diagonals and now I just have this corner left to do, and I will mark out the middle of the diagonals just that I have a straight line to quilt upon. For that I am using this Pilot friction pen, which is supposed to go off or get off in the washing, or as soon as it hits a certain number of degrees. And this quilt really needs to be washed. It has been worked on, or I started it 3 years ago. My dog lay on it when she was not that clean. It really needs to get washed, so I am really looking forward to doing that. But first I have to finish the quilting, do the binding and all that stuff. So let's get on with that. So I finished all the diagonal quilting, which I wanted to do to get the binding on. I just put it on the bed because it looks a bit nicer here. And I am really looking forward to putting the binding on to finally get rid of these loose edges. But my thoughts were now that I only quilted up to this point and the binding is supposed to come somewhere here, that it would probably be better if I also quilted all these edge diamonds, which I'm not that keen to do because I really want to get the edge on, but they need to be quilted one way or the other at some point. Now I have already started quilting some diamonds, and I have to say I like some quilting that I did and I really don't like some quilting that I did, but I am starting to find my patterns that I like and that I will use, and I just don't want to be that afraid to have multiple of the same one. So I really like this type of just quilting the outer edges. This one is also quilted. You can barely see it because I quilted in these circles. This one is just replicating these little leaves that I also really like. This one is doing something very similar to the first one I showed you, just quilting along these edges, which is also really simple and I really love the feel of it. This one is one that I'm not really that keen about. I am not sure if I will maybe unpick this and re-quilt it. Same with this one. This is really boring and kind of stupid. I also quilted some stars. This one is actually with this little star sign, or whatever you call it in English, sorry. But I also have a few where I just quilted some stars, which I also really enjoy. So I will probably get going on quilting the edge diamonds and just going with the ones that I love, and even if I repeat them over and over again, those are the ones that I really like and really enjoy, and which are probably nicer than if I do some weird experiments. This leaf is okay, but I might also unpick that. But if I unpick any of these, I will do that at the end if I'm still unhappy about them. I mean, there's maybe 4 or maximum of 5 that I don't like, which I would unpick and do again, but not before most of the rest of this quilt is done.
So after finishing some of the diamonds, I got kind of bored doing that and really just wanted to put on the binding. So I decided that I would not continue making the outer diamonds, quilting the outer diamonds, and just sew on the binding. I know that is not how you were supposed to make a quilt. You were supposed to finish the quilting before you put on the binding, but I thought, well, it's my quilt, so I can also do this by my rules. The quilt batting was a bit bigger than my quilt top, so I could cut off some excess and hope to use this in some future projects. I hope I am not the only one who has not actually finished a quilt even, but is already planning the next 4 quilts in her head and really wants to get started on those. an impatient person, and I have watched videos of how you put on the binding on a quilt, but those were some time ago, so I just started and quickly realized my first mistake, because I started sewing in the binding right at the beginning of the binding. You're supposed to leave a gap of like a few centimeters or inches, so that when you are once around the quilt, you have some excess that you can easily sew to the end of your quilt to make a nice binding. So when it came to the end of the binding, I had to unpick the beginning just to make a nice finish. And then I realized my second mistake, because you are actually supposed to fold the binding over and sew it on double, so you can just flip it over and it's finished. And I did not do that. I sewed it on just in a single layer, and I thought that would be quite easy to rectify, so just folding it over and sewing once around. But the corners were not that easy, or not as easy as I thought they would be, so I had to go back and unpick all the corners, and I'm really not a fan of unpicking, but you learn, and in my next quilts I will definitely not make these same mistakes. I had marked where I wanted to begin with my binding, just because of some patterns that weren't actually that necessary in the end, but never mind. But then I could iron away the markings, because they were also made with this friction pen, which disappears reaching a certain number of degrees, and it was really fun to do that. Also, like, erase the markings that I made at the diagonals, so I could finally see how the kind of finished project would actually look like. To finish my binding, I first started sewing it down with the same beige that I used for sewing all the other seams in this quilt, but I was not that big of a fan. So I used the same DMC cotton thread that I used for my big stitch quilting, and I really like the more rustic look it gives to this rather delicate quilt, or these rather delicate fabrics, and I like the mix of that. So I will now just put onto YouTube. I've really been enjoying Kate's videos from the last Only House, and continue sewing down my binding. Thank you so much for sharing some time with me, and until next time.